Budget 2013 was significant for its increase in taxes. As the government shifts towards more progressive taxes, and if already seen significant moves with property and cars, what is the threshold for raising taxes and increasing the progressive nature of Singapore's fiscal system? In other words, what is a long-term fiscal strategy?
First of all, we have to expect that our social spending will continue to grow. It's been growing significantly in the last few years, and it will continue to grow, particularly as Singaporeans become older, because healthcare needs will grow. The question is how you obtain the revenues. We do need over time, over the long term, to think of the best sources of revenues. And we've got to make sure that what we do is fair and equitable, but also keep Singapore competitive, because that's what provides jobs for lower and middle income Singaporeans. It's a competitive economy, and finding the right balance is important. Philosophically, I have nothing against raising income taxes, but we have to be practical about how far we can go and when we can move even. The raw fact of the matter is that Hong Kong has a cap of 15% at the top end. People sometimes look at the top marginal rate, but the top marginal rate in Hong Kong is not relevant because they actually cap the effective tax paid at 15%. In our case, it's for the very high income earners, it's 19 to 20%. So that's already a gap, and we have to be practical about how much, whether it's possible to widen that gap without impairing our competitiveness as a key business hub in Asia, which is very important for not just the individuals and firms who are involved in that activity, it's important for the whole economy. Remember, our income tax schedule is actually maximum marginal tax rate of 20%, and then at the other end, we've got minus 30% for our older, low-income workers. So it's minus 30% of income tax, a negative income tax by paying workfare to low-income workers, and plus 20% at the top end. Already quite a progressive income tax schedule. I wouldn't rule out income tax moves in the long term, but let's go about it pragmatically. I do favor, however, besides income taxes, when you look at our whole tax system, I do favor further moves towards progressivity over time. And that means that if you don't have too much scope to do it through income taxes, that we have to look at other ways, and especially at asset taxes, property taxes being the most practical way of going about it. We've made two moves in the last 3 years, and this year especially we steepened the property tax schedule. It used to be flat, and 2 years ago we moved to a progressive schedule of property taxes. This year we made it even more progressive. I don't think that's the final step. So we'll have to study this carefully. It depends also on what happens in terms of our current measures to cool the market, because we introduce all sorts of new taxes. And once those taxes are no longer necessary for cyclical reasons, we'll have to see what replaces them for the long term. That's basically the strategy for progressivity. Be careful and make sure that we don't undermine the competitiveness of our economy in a way that will lose our ability to create good jobs for lower and middle income Singaporeans. But spending is also very important. How we spend is as important as how much we spend. We do need to provide greater support for older Singaporeans, particularly in healthcare and for their retirement needs. That's something which we want to do. And we have to go about it in a way that doesn't lead us to the problems we've seen in Europe and the United States or Japan. Go about it in a way that's sustainable. And it means that subsidies do have to be targeted. They can't be across the board, including for the upper middle income group or upper income individuals. They have to be targeted at the middle and lower end of our retirees. It does mean that some co-payment is necessary because that leads to individual responsibility. But very importantly, it means also shifting the balance of our spending in healthcare so that over time we place greater priority on preventive care and primary care, and not just on what happens in the acute hospitals. So it's not just what happens when you end up in hospital, but it's about managing diseases well and preventing diseases from growing. So that's a very important strategy long term as well. So we'll make some shifts because we want to do more for older Singaporeans, particularly that generation of older Singaporeans that has had low pay for much of their lives. And you have to remember that their pay was very low 20 to 30 years ago. They haven't accumulated much savings, and they deserve more help.
When you talked about raising income taxes in the long term, do you have a sense of, is it in the next 10 years that might occur?
Whether we raise income taxes or not is something we have not decided. All I'm saying is that philosophically I have nothing against it. It's a practical issue that we have to study carefully. But improving the progressivity of our system further, it's already a very progressive system, but improving it further is, I think, a desirable objective, and it'll have to be chiefly by way of asset taxes and what we do on workfare.
There's been a Wall Street Journal article going around depicting Singapore as a playground for the wealthy, and where they talk to very rich people here. Is this perception of Singapore being a playground for the wealthy something that you worry, concerned about?
Well, I don't think it describes the way our society functions as a whole, including the way in which better off people conduct themselves generally. But there is a risk over time of that old culture of being low-key and not ostentatious getting weakened. There's a risk. That culture could change. It could become a lot more flashy. And I don't think that'll be good for Singapore society. Now, to paraphrase Deng Xiaoping, if we leave our windows open, we'll get insects flying in. Some will have a lot of bling and color. But that's what happens when your windows are open. I think we'll have to maintain a balance in our society as a whole, and try our best to keep culture that is not one based on excesses, but is one based on responsibility. I would not, however, shape policy based on magazine articles or occasional articles, because articles make the best reading when they talk about what's really at the edge, rather than what describes the society as a whole.